what we're saying, the Bluff Creek project started out as a historical project to find out the truth behind the local Bigfoot culture and history. Like that was me and a fellow I met eventually met in 2009, Ian Carden from over here in Reading. He and I had both been going up there to Bluff Creek a few times and just curious, where's the film site? Where was this Patterson film shot? And anyway, my first trips up there were probably 1999 or 2000 and 2000 and 2001. And I could not find it. I found my way to like the most famous place, like Laos Camp, and camped there. And, the more you hike around, the more lost you feel because it's so overgrown up in there. And so by 2003, they had the International Bigfoot Symposium here in Willow Creek, which was a major deal. It brought it brought into the next millennium all the old timers like Jim McLaren, Ed Patrick, John Green, Bob Gimlin, and Al Hodgson. Just an endless collection of these old timer guys who ought to have known. And more modern authors like Christopher Murphy and Daniel Perez, they ought to have known where the film site was. And they even had a TV show with Doug Hychek and his Mysterious Encounters crew, which at that time involved Moneymaker and Autumn Williams, kind of vying for dominance on the show. Like, who was the real host? Like, everybody, of course, wanted to look at Autumn Williams, not Matt Moneymaker, but that also had an entourage. And so between all these groups, nobody could find the film site, which to me was just shocking. I was living out here. I started to think to myself, how could they all have not known where it was? And I started asking questions of all the people who were involved. What did you think? Where do you think it was? What do you know about the environment and the history of this? And it was just endlessly convoluted because everyone had a different memory, a different theory, or a different ideology. Like MK Davis, he thought it was way down the opposite direction from where everybody else was looking, which was upstream from where they went. And so MK Davis had his own film site over there, and then there were like 7 other ones, and we just decided this is really too confusing. We are gonna have to solve this problem. And so we set off to do that in 2009. And then in 2010, we got a friend of ours join up with us. It was Robert Leiterman, the State Parks forest ranger, who's also one of the earliest BFRO expedition organizers that there was. He joined us, and he was our videographer at first, just recording us babbling on and on and on, making all manner of mistakes for 2010 and 2011. So we had 3 years basically of studying this thing until we had finally felt like we got rid of all the baloney, and we got right down to surveying the site that we thought was the most likely site. And it turned out to be the exact site, without any doubt. Eventually, we surveyed the site on a grid that we lined up with a compass and tape measure, and so it was all very exact in 10 by 10 squares, and we documented every piece of whatever was in that 10 by 10 square to see what was there that was old. Like, could it have been there in 1967 was our question. And we had to eliminate everything else, all the young trees, all the big piles of brush and vines and broken branches and everything that was obscuring the site. So we had a record of old stumps that were, to our amazement, were in the exact same location that they were in 1967. Like everyone has said, there's not going to be a stump there after 40 or 50 years. But guess what? There was, and the log jams that are down in the creek, those things still haven't washed or rotted away. They're the same wood, and it's up on sand, up on the sandbars, a raised sandbar. So when that big flood in 64 came through, it deposited all that fine silt sand and gravel, and then ran through and left behind a bunch of log jams as the dam blasted through, and all that water went down through the whole creek canyon doing that. But what we had in 64 was just blasted out completely, and that's where you see paddy walking, is on that fine silt that was left behind by the flood. And by the 70s, it had already started growing back trees, just growing right out of the gravel, right? So by the 80s, it started, and those are like pretty much the last reliable visits to the site that we were able to find public record of. Was in the 80s, the late 80s, maybe a few in the early 90s, but at that point, it just dropped off the map, and nobody we could find knew where this film site was anymore. And there were always rumors that there was somebody out there who did know, but it didn't do us much good if they were like in an old age home and senile, right? Or dead. Right. A lot of people, like Renee Hinden, obviously was the one who knew best, because even Peter Byrne couldn't identify the film site, and he took the best photographs of the film site back in 71 or 2, whatever year that was. And but he asked in the 2000s, and he obviously had no clue, because we went to exactly where he said it was, and for one, it's on the wrong side of the creek. The gravel bar is over here, and he had it all backwards, and there wasn't enough room in there to do anything either. Yeah, so they just make up stuff, to cover their asses, right. Basically. Oh well, that's because the creek moved, and it's like, no, it didn't.